when I look back at it, she was really a pretty good woman. She put up with my dad all those years. He never would go to church. He had a period of time when he went through quite a lot of drinking. My mother, I guess early in her marriage, she put my dad was number one in her marriage. Then she put up with Dad doing what he did, and she made up her mind and she was going to stay with him, regardless of what she had to do to stay with him, and she did. So, I have to have a high regard for her for that.
She was totally in love with him. She took whatever he dished out, and she turned it into a positive every time. Mother went with Dad. She never let Dad get away from her very much. If at all possible, she would go with him when he wanted to go to Greer or go anywhere. She would go with him because she just, I don't know whether she didn't trust him or whether she had a bad experience with him, but I do know that she stuck to him pretty close. Every time he went somewhere, she wanted to go with him. So we were left home alone quite a bit. And in those days, we had Aunt Esther and Aunt Alta, that was Dad's sister, and her daughter would live with us, stay with us a lot during the summer. They lived in Iowa, Des Moines, Iowa, and they live out here in the summer and the wintertime because of the cold, bad winters back there. And they would cook for us. They would prepare our meals and stuff like that. That's where I learned to hate casseroles, because that's all they would cook is casseroles. Milk was about a quarter a gallon. And 1 month, we had the milk delivered in those days. They had a delivery in the gallon jugs, And when Dad got home and he saw his milk bill, he thought, what the heck was going on? Because it was $60, and it was about 50 cents a gallon or a quarter a gallon in those days. And we drank a gallon of milk a day, easy, because that's what we lived on, because we couldn't stand the food that they was making for us. We kept throwing it in the garbage disposal and drinking milk. I drank up $60 worth of milk in 1 month's time.
Yeah, my mom was busy. She was, very busy with all of the kids. And Daryl and I were more or less a surprise to her, because after Jack was born, Dad come down with mumps. And Dr. Kent said that she didn't have to worry about any more children because the mumps took care of that. And her mother ended up getting pregnant with me. And so Dad asked him what he could do. He says, he said he would tie mother's tubes, and that way that would be for sure there would be no more kids. And then Daryl came along. So Daryl was free. He guaranteed him that he wouldn't have any more kids, since the guarantee was that he delivered Daryl for free.
Grandma was very handy at sewing. She did a lot of sewing. She crocheted. She knitted. I think she crocheted all of us a bedspread at one time or the other. And she just liked to keep busy.
I can tell you one thing Grandma did not like to do was cook. And she was not a very good cook, and she didn't really want to be a good cook. And I always said that Daryl married me because he always ended up at our house eating, because he was really hungry, and Nani was such a good cook. But Grandma did not like to cook. She could make chili, and she could make pancakes. And she could make basic stuff. She fed the kids. It didn't look like they were starving, but she just didn't enjoy it. She didn't really want to cook. She did it because they had to eat.
Mother didn't like to cook. She didn't. She wasn't a big fan of cooking. So we grew up pretty much on it, like you say, hamburgers, potatoes, corn on the cob in season. The meals that I remember that she did do a good job at was breakfast. She always made us a good breakfast. She always had either bacon and eggs or pancakes or waffles. Always had a good breakfast every day. She did do a lot of canning though. And I remember she learned how to can corn. We'd go out at 4 o'clock in the morning and pick it, and then shuck it, and then she'd take it in and she'd put it in the dishwasher. And then she'd run it through a dishwasher cycle, and that would blanch it, and then she'd take and cut the kernels off the corn, and then put it in the bottles, and then put it in the oven and bake it. With the lids all loose, and then when she'd get out of the oven, she'd tighten the lids down, and it would pull a vacuum in it that would preserve it. She canned a lot of corn and potatoes, tomatoes, because we always had a garden, a big garden, not just a small garden, not what you'd call a garden today, but it was like an acre.
When they first lived out on the farm here in Queen Creek, she raised chickens and turkeys, guinea hens, the noisiest, peacocks. She had all kinds.
Yeah. Always milked their own cow. Daryl said all growing up he had to milk a cow twice a day.
But one thing I remember that would sound odd to kids today is that she would order baby chicks, and everybody did this during then. The only way to get baby chicks to grow in the spring was order them from a catalog. And they would send the baby chicks in a big box, it was a big square box, to the post office. They would come through the post office, and we would have to go to the post office and pick up this box of chickens. And you'd walk in the post office, and all you could hear, all hundreds of chickens that people had ordered, little jacks. And she would raise those chickens, and then she killed them, ate them. They ate them.
The eggs,
and they had eggs. The guineas were their watchdog. They would start cackling or when anybody came around, so you knew someone was out there. Turkeys, they ate the turkeys, milked the cow. She was really hard worker. Yeah, I always thought it was kind of odd that she didn't get dressed every day. She just wore this house coat. We called it an old chenille house coat. She'd be out there feeding chickens and working, and all she had on was this old chenille house coat.
But they didn't have any neighbors when they lived on the farm here for years and years, just some hired help that worked for them, and were kind of out there all by themselves.
Church versus working on Sunday. When we were growing up, it was Mother saw to it that we were able to go to church if it was what she wanted us to do. I mean, us going to church was important to Mother, more important than us working on the farm to her. And so she was able to get Dad to relinquish that control over us, so at least we could go to Sunday school. We didn't always, back in those days, you had priesthood meeting, and then you had Sunday school, and then that night you had church. So she'd make sure that we would get to Sunday school, and then we could go home and go to work. And we may not get to sacrament meeting that night, because it didn't start till 6 o'clock in the evening. The typical thing was you go to priesthood meeting and the Sunday school, and then if there's something needed to be done on the farm, you did it after that, and then you could go back to the sacrament meeting that night. if you got your stuff done. Yeah. So it was a give and take on both sides.
She would never really confront you when she thought you were doing something you shouldn't do, or she didn't like or anything. But she would write you a letter. Did you ever get a letter?
I never got a letter. It must have been really good. Well, let me tell you something else about Grandma and Grandpa that I remember is we used to laugh about it when we were first married because, or even later, Grandpa was this big gruff and this is the way we were doing things. And we used to say, we're going to do things what Grandpa wants to do as long as Grandma tells him that's what he wants to do. I mean, she called the shots. I know not many people know that. She really called the shots in the family. And but she did it in a very interesting way. Grandpa he would end up doing whatever she wanted to do, but we can't let her know that that's what he's doing.
She was trying to get Grandpa to eat healthier, and she didn't like him drinking coffee. She would dump the coffee out of the coffee can and fill it with decaf, and she fed him decaf. Now, I'm sure he was drinking decaf, but I never heard him complain out here. She's thrown away his coffee.
Grandma Maude was always sweet and kind and compassionate. She was kind of the go-between and would try to get things done. She was also very passionate about family history. And during my college days, I became very passionate about family history, genealogy. So she would take the time to pass that information along and to make sure that I followed up on work and did that. And we would spend hours talking about it and going through group sheets and trying to get things organized. She was very organized to the point of getting all the information and have correspondence with cousins in Colorado and all over the place. She moved in and lived with Maude, and it wasn't very far from where we lived at the time. And she was not feeling good. I'd go over visit with her and talk to her. And one day she was having some heart issues and some trouble, and she got up about 3 a.m. and started typing me a letter, and I need you to do this and this and this, and you need to follow up and make sure this work's been done. And oh, by the way, here's 2 family members that you need to follow up on because they were grandkids of hers that hadn't been baptized or been baptized and hadn't been active, and you need to follow up on them.
They loved to travel. Grandma loved to travel. She loved to travel and do genealogy. She would go visit cemeteries in Georgia and all over to try to find some Damerons. She told me a funny story one time that they found some Damerons. Her maiden name was Dameron, and she knew they had migrated from Texas or somewhere in the South and joined the church. And so she found some she thought might help her with genealogy. And so Grandpa took her to this town in Georgia, and they went and knocked on the door. It was Damerons, and when they went to the door, the guy that came to the door was a great big black man. It really startled her, so I don't know how she got out of that, but they did. They traveled all over. They loved to fish. They loved to hunt and travel and see places. Grandma loved to play solitaire to the cabin. Remember her playing solitaire for hours.
Grandma was a very good person and she was very religious, and she was pretty well read in the church. I mean, she knew quite a bit about the church and she lived a good life. She liked her grandkids. She wasn't the bake your cookies kind of grandma, but
she liked to give them gifts, but she didn't like wrapping.
So she always gave it to them in a brown paper bag.
Yeah, I was going to say that. A little brown paper bag.
And I can kind of understand that now.
I like it. I use that. I don't want it hurt to grab those.
Yeah, it might. I kind of,
I'll flip through the money. Well, the first time I ever met Grandpa Schnapp that I can recall is when I was probably about 6 or 7. And he was with Uncle Arts, and they were in the car going someplace. And I don't know why Naira and I were with them, but we were in the back seat, and he got to looking at my hands, and I had warts. But he said, "Let me see your hand. I can charm those warts off." And so he took my hand and rubbed it, and the warts disappeared. And I know Max swears up and down that he could charm warts right off from you. He never went to church. He was never active. He supported her. He supported not only physically, but he supported with money. I'm sure he let her pay her tithing and do whatever, and contributions. But Sunday to him was work day.
When I was growing up, I couldn't do sports in school because he wouldn't allow it. He says, you got excess energy, you get your butt home, and I got plenty of things for you to do here. So we didn't do sports. That's the reason we didn't do sports. And when I was growing up and in the Boy Scouts, I couldn't go to Boy Scout events. Like going to camp. I never went to Boy Scout camp because he wouldn't allow it. I wanted to. We could only participate in a limited amount of church activities. If it was at the Word or here locally, it was fine, no problem. But if we had to go overnight somewhere and it cost money, Dad would nix it. He would say no. However, I remember 1952, there was a jamboree in Irvine, California. And we was able to go to the jamboree in Irvine, California. We joined up with the Chandler, one of the Chandler troops. The way that Daryl and I was able to get things out of Dad was to go to Mother and convince her that it was the right thing to do. And once we did that, then Dad was okay with it because she convinced him that it was okay. But if we went to him straight out, not a chance. The first response was no. Not only no, but hell no.
Well, Grandpa was, like we have said previously, just a kind of a big, gruff man, but he was always very nice to me. He was very kind, and even though he was scary, I was so used to Pappy, my dad, who was such a peaceful kind of guy, and Grandpa was just kind of loud, had the cigar, it was kind of gruff, and Grandma, I remember meeting when I was in primary. She was the primary president for a while. We were meeting in the barracks building, and I remember her. I was really little, and she and I used to talk, and she's a kind person, good person. So did spend some time with him. And Grandpa was big at that time, but he later, after we got married, lost a lot of weight. He lost probably close to 100 pounds. And I remember him coming to our house. He would just, as typical Schneff fashion, he just decided to quit eating. And so that's how he lost weight. But he was drinking grape juice and cream tartar mixed together. That's what filled him up. And he would come, when Daryl and I were newlyweds, by the house. But he had a lot of back problems when he was heavy. And when he started losing weight is because of his back, I think.
He told me one time that he had gone on an elimination diet, and if he stayed on it one more week, it was going to totally eliminate him.
Yeah, he did lose a ton of weight. Meeting Grandpa, probably one of my first memories of him is when we used to go over to the swimming pool swimming when we were kids. When Daryl, we were probably, I don't know, my brother Bob was good friends with Don and Daryl, and so we'd go over there swimming, and they had a lot of ward parties and stuff, and he would be there. But he always just scared the living daylights out of all of us kids because he was a big, gruff man. He really had a really soft heart, but he was really a scary man to the kids. And he always had a cigar. He had a cigar in his mouth at all times.
So he had quite a reputation around him. the area. He was known to be the meanest SOB in the valley. For people who didn't know him, they all had that opinion of him because of his reputation. I remember one time on the farm, Salt River Project was going to put a new power line in down the south side of his farm. He decided that they weren't, and they pulled in with their trucks. They were going to start digging post holes for the posts. He told Raymond to go get the bulldozer, and I'm going to move those trucks off my property. And it was a standoff. And when the bulldozer almost got to where the trucks were, the man in charge said, "Well, we're not going to let it go to this far." So he pulled off, and Dad won the case for that issue for that period of time. But they ended up putting the fire line in the long run.
One thing about Grandpa that he didn't have much formal schooling. I think he dropped out of school probably in the 6th grade or something like that. I mean, he could read and write, but he didn't have a lot of formal schooling, and but he was very, like you say, very inventive and very, very mechanical. But he was always really very kind to me. I mean, I have fond memories of how he always treated me. He was tough. He was tough, though. He was tough on those boys, really tough. And the girls. The girl. But, that's a whole different story.
I only remember my dad getting mad enough at the kids one time that he could have. He was mad enough to hit some of us. I remember that. And he got mad at us because we got my mom down. We got her down. I guess we must have arguing or fighting or whatever. And she kind of broke down, and he got pretty sore over it. That's the only time I know of that he really got mad at us. That I really knew he was mad. He was really mad at that time. He was a tough old guy, and we knew it. And we knew when he said something that he meant it.
Well, my dad, very early in my life, he took Daryl and I aside one day, and he set us down, and he says, "Look, boys," he says, "you've got older brothers." He says, "and there isn't anything you can do that I don't know about. There isn't anything you can say that I don't already know you're going to say it before you say it. And there isn't anything that you're going to get away with. So don't try it. Don't even try it, because I'm not going to be very happy if you do." Knowing his temper, he had a flashpoint temper, and it didn't take much to get him to flash his temper. I remember the last time I did it to him, we were still at the Grove in Mesa, and I remember he grabbed me by my left arm with his left arm, and we went around and around in a circle, and every step he took, his boot landed right in my butt. And he wore those cowboy boots with the pointed toes, and it hurt like hell. And I didn't want to have that happen again, and I did remember that. And so I took his warning very literally. One time, they got almost come to blows. Daryl said he thought he was going to hit him. I think it was over the airplane which Daryl crashed. Of course, it was insured, so we got the insurance. Daryl got the insurance check, and he went to Dad, and he says, "I got the check for the airplane." And Dad said, "Let me see it." And took the check, put it in his pocket, and he says, "Okay, boys, you can pay the loan off of the airplane." And Daryl got so mad at him that Dad was going to hit him, because they got into a real argument over that. Well, we had it financed at the bank, and we owed $20,000 on the airplane. And we were signed on the loan, so we had to pay the loan off. And that was his way of making his point.
Grandpa Schneff loved cars.
Grandma told me one time, she says, there were times we didn't have food on the table. We didn't know where food was coming from on the table. We had a new car. So,
All the boys had cars.
yeah.
Everybody had cars. And they were not cheap. I mean, for that day and age, they were all nice, new, good cars.
My dad had, I'll put it this way, he had probably more cars than any human being I've ever known. He bought a new car every year. This was dating back into the early 40s. He bought a new car every year. He bought a new Cadillac every year. He bought every Cadillac that they ever built from about 1949, 48, 49 until he died.
He had this thing with highway patrolmen. There was, I think, three instances that he had the run-ins with him. That one time he was driving from Shoal to Springerville, and this cop dropped in behind him and was pacing him, so he couldn't go. He had to go the speed limit until there was a board or something in the road that he had to go around, and the cop stopped to move it out of the road. But when the cop stopped to move it out, Dad stepped on the gas. He was about halfway between Shoal and Springerville. They were still a lot of miles from Springerville. He just floorboarded it. They were in the restaurant and was eating lunch by the time the cop came in. By the time he got there. But it was that time. Then the time that the highway patrolman, he was going up this hill, going into Superior, or a hill that was going up. It's quite a long grade up there. And this cop stopped him and gave him a ticket for speeding. And when they got before the judge, Dad told him, he was driving that little International Scout, and it wasn't a very powerful machine. It was pretty weak as far as power than that. And the judge found out that he was driving a Scout, and it just so happens the judge had one. He had a Scout. He said, for heaven's sake, he said, he had that Scout, and that Scout wouldn't even go downhill on that hill, much less uphill going that fast. So he just dismissed it. But what the judge didn't know, that Dad had put a Chevrolet engine in that Scout.
I remember when he had the Jaguar. He bought a Jaguar back in, must have been about 49 or 50. It was one of those little long Jaguars, had there's a two-seater, but it had a V12 engine in it. And the thing would go 150 miles an hour. Back in 1950, that was fast. And that was very unusual. He used to drive it between the ranch and Greer, and he used to play with the highway patrol, and because they didn't have radios like they do today where they could radio ahead. They didn't have that kind of coverage in those days. And Dad knew that, so he'd be flying down the road 100 miles an hour, and the highway patrol would be parked on the side of the road, so he would take out after him. So Dad would just play with him for a ways, and then he would just take off, and because he could outrun a highway patrol car. They'd only go about 95 miles an hour in those days. That's about top speed. He'd go up to 120, 130 miles an hour, get ahead of him, and pull off the side of the road, hide behind a tree or a road sign, and watch the highway patrol go flying down the road to try to catch him. Yeah, we had a 120 to start with. Raymond and Dad. Raymond ended up buying the airplane for Dad. Dad paid for it. Everybody flew it. Bob flew it, Raymond flew it, and Max flew it, and Jack flew it. Everybody flew the airplane, but it was Dad's airplane, and he kept it. Dad never flew. That was interesting. He always thought he was too old to fly. When he was in his 50s, he theorized that he was too old to fly, so he never tried. But he loved airplanes. He loved flying, but he never wanted to do it himself. I remember when we had the 182, I flew with them to Havasu a lot. We'd fly from here to Havasu and back because Jack was living in Havasu, running the Crazy Ed's restaurant over there, and I would fly Mother and Dad over there to have lunch, and they liked that. Mother liked that part of flying, but she didn't like it to the point where she would want to do it herself. No.
Grandpa was pretty mellow at the end. He always had a pretty soft heart, even though he had a gruff exterior. He didn't want anybody to know it, but he was tough. He was pretty tough, but he didn't express himself about, much. And he suffered a lot in the last few years of his life. And I remember the last time we went to the hospital when he had prostate cancer, and we went to get him, and he just told Daryl, he says, take me home. I don't want to die in the hospital. He was always giving his kids things. I mean, we always had cars, and he'd give us the TV. I mean, if anything, kind of hand-me-down stuff, but he was always kind of watching out for
the younger kid. I remember when I was visiting with Grandpa one day when he was not feeling good and sick, and right by his chair, he had a globe of the world, one of those old ones that turns, and he had marked on it where his grandsons had gone on missions, and that kind of struck me. I thought that he talked about him and talked about how proud of him he was. And that time there was Larry and Dwayne and Kevin, I think Kevin and Dylan. How many of them are Mark, and then gone from South America, Brazil, Australia, places in the U.S., and he had them marked on his globe so he knew where his grandkids had gone, and he really admired that part of his boys and how proud he was that they would be adventuresome enough to do that, and how good he thought it was.
Dad was down sick for a long time. For a year or two, he was down from several months. I went in to visit with my dad about a few months before he died, and he was pretty much bedridden. He was laying on the couch in the living room, and he told me that the one thing he regretted in his life that he didn't do was church activity. I'm sure I'm the only one ever had ever imagined that too. And I thought that was something important to say that. And he regretted that he wasn't active in the church. So he wasn't as tough an old man that he had people think that he was. He smoked a big part of his life and had them drinking bouts ever so often. But in his later life, he wouldn't let anybody in his house that smoked or in his car. He said he was going down the road one day and got to wonder what the hell he was doing smoking. He said he threw that damn cigar out the window and he never smoked after. He just quit. He was supposed to be a tough old guy, but all of his kids, they knew he meant it. He never had trouble with any of his kids, except Dale. He had trouble with Dale, and then that was all that amounted to was that Dale would blow up and walk away and leave. I left him with my dad, and he'd do that. And we got along good together. I got along with my dad good all my life. Well, the last 2 years of their life, they were gone all the time. Now I say Dad never went to church. She couldn't get him to go to church, but he spent 2 or 3 years driving her all over the United States doing her genealogy, and drove her all over the country, all over the United States. They spent a lot of time driving her around.
They were always just a really cute couple. They see, and now I didn't spend that much time with them, but they always seemed to me to be very devoted to each other and really cared about each other. I can remember seeing them walking along holding hands, and I was a little kid, and I was thinking, gosh, they're so old. Why are they holding hands? It just didn't seem right. But it was just so, the other side of it was that it was just cute.
My impression of Grandma and Grandpa was they were very equal in their relationship. They spent a tremendous amount of time together. It was rare that I didn't see Grandpa, unless he was on the farm, without Grandma. Whether that be socially or playing, when I say playing, fishing, hunting, they always traveled together. I don't recall a time in my growing up where they took a trip without each other.
I definitely think that Grandpa adored Grandma, and I know Grandma adored him, or she would not have put up with his antics all these years, but all the years that they did. And I think their love was a true thing, and I think that they really had their hands busy with the family that they had, with all the boys. I know that Mom used to talk about a lot, how hard it was. I know that she had a lot of the responsibility of watching the younger kids, especially Don and Daryl, who were the youngest. And I think that Grandma was way in over her head with all of her boys, and Grandpa. Grandpa was the number one person in her life. And I wouldn't say that the rest suffered for it, because I don't really think that's the right word. I just think that was their life, and they did the best they could do with it. And I think that they all helped each other. I think the whole family really did have a love for one another, because they had to. They had to help each other just get by in life. And
I remember a while after Grandpa had passed away and Grandma came to live with my mom and dad, I remember there were some letters that she had kept, and we were reading these letters at some point in time, and it was just really kind of a surprise to me. You don't think of your grandparents as being romantic, They're just grandparents, And I remember reading these letters, and he just loved her so much. And that was really neat to see in these letters, to read about how much he cared for her.
Mom had moved in with my sister Maude. She was in there. She just simply died of old age. She was 88. But she just died of old age symptoms, whatever they were. I mean, we knew she was going and about to go, and she knew it too. Wasn't any surprise when she died.
Grandma was living with Maudine, and Maudine took really good care of her. She still didn't get dressed. She always had a robe on, but she was, I don't think she was suffering at all. She was normal. She died very peacefully. Maudine called us at like 4 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, and says she just went to bed one night and went to sleep and didn't wake up.
Yeah, I think she called Maudine into her bedroom before she died. She did something to alert him that she was in distress. But then she just went to sleep. So she was a good and kind woman.
Yeah, she was that.
She treated the kids so good and took care of so good. And if we needed help from something that Dad did, well, she took care of it for us.
She never complained much. Mother never complained about Dad to us ever at all. When he would come down on her and embarrass her in front of us, she would never complain about it. She never ever complained. At times she would fight back when he would come down on her. Yes. If she knew she was in the right, If she knew she was 100% right, she would go right back at it. But if she thought he had any of the right on his side, she would back off and just let him vent. What I loved most about my mom, or remember most about her, was her sense of protection and her devotion. Her devotion to us was just it was without limits. She didn't have any limit for what she would do for us.